Hello. Now I would like to talk about pros and cons about nuclear power generation in Japan. Do you know what percentage of nuclear power accounts for Japan's electricity generation? In 2020, thermal power accounted for 75%, renewable energy for about 21%, and nuclear power for about 4%. But prior to Great East Japan earthquake of March 2011, there were 54 nuclear power plants in Japan, and about 30% of the electricity used in Japan was supplied by nuclear power. As of March 2021, 10 years after Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, only 9 nuclear power plants have been restarted. And on the other hand, as many as 21 reactors have been decided to be decommissioned. But the government has set a goal of increasing this to more than 20%. Is that possible? And is it the right thing to do in the first place? First of all, I am against nuclear power generation. There were 3 reasons. First, it is expensive. In July 2021, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry estimated that the cost per kilowatt hour for nuclear power will be 14.4 yen. And coal-fired power generation is cheaper than nuclear power at 13.9 yen, and more cheaper LNG, liquefied natural gas-fired power generation is 11 yen. The government has admitted that the nuclear power doesn't have an advantage in cost. So secondly, nuclear power plants are not safe. As evidenced by the Fukushima disaster, once a nuclear accident occurs, it can cause irreparable damage. In the 10 years following Fukushima disaster, the cost of decommissioning the nuclear power plant, compensating the victims, and decontaminating the contaminated areas have already amounted to at least 13.3 trillion yen. That's about 130 billion US dollars. According to government estimates, the total cost of the accident is estimated at 21.5 trillion yen, but the cost is likely to exceed the estimated, and because it takes at least another 30 years. According to the Japan Center for Economic Research, the actual cost of dealing with the Fukushima nuclear accident is likely to be between 35 and 80 trillion yen over 40 years. If these costs are included, the cost of generating electricity from nuclear power plants will jump significantly. In addition, 10 years after the disaster, there were still 36,000 displaced people. This is the number of people in temporary housing, not including those who live elsewhere. It brings not only economic loss, but also destruction of their communities. More than 20% of the world earthquakes with a magnitude of 6 or higher occur here in Japan, and 7% of the world's active volcanoes are concentrated in Japan. The Cabinet Office website explains the danger of future earthquake as follows. The average interval between earthquakes off the coast of northeastern part of Japan is about 37 years, and the probability of an earthquake of magnitude 7.5 occurring within 10 years is about 60%, and within 30 years, it will reach 99%. 99% within 30 years, a big earthquake will occur. Many scholars believe that installing more than 50 nuclear power plants in a place like Japan, where multiple plates are mixed and earthquakes occur frequently, is simply absurd. And thirdly, nuclear power plants emit CO2 as well. If you look at only a partial process, it appears that no CO2 is emitted from nuclear power plants. However, the mining, uranium, refining, enrichment, and transportation of uranium, mainly from Australia and Canada, construction of nuclear power plants, the decade-long cold storage of used nuclear fuel, the decommissioning of nuclear power plant that takes more than a decade. When all of these are included, unfortunately, the claim that no CO2 will be produced at all becomes completely false. And what I'm really worried about is that people are forgetting this tragic disaster 10 years ago. According to a poll conducted by the Japan Nuclear Power Culture Foundation, the number of people who think nuclear power is unreliable increased from 10% to 30% after the disaster, but decreased to 24% in 2019. Those who think nuclear power plants are necessary decreased from 35% to 15% right after the disaster, but increased to 24% in 2019. While opposed still outweighs in favor of restarting nuclear power plants, a change in sentiment among the general public is apparent. Are people forgetting the horrible disaster, or are they being made to forget? Isn't the Japanese government trying to make us forget Fukushima disaster? The people need to be reminded again. The people must remember the tragic events 10 years ago. The Fukushima accident was a level 7 nuclear disaster, the worst category of nuclear disaster like the Chernobyl accident, and even the 3 Mile accident in the US is level 5. What guarantee do we have that it won't happen again? German Angela Merkel, who took office as chancellor in 2005, initially tried to extend the life of nuclear power plants by reversing the previous government's policy of phasing out nuclear power. However, after witnessing the accident at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, she decided to close all nuclear power plants by the end of 2022. It was a graceful decision that acknowledged that the error of the previous decision to promote nuclear power. The German people, still fearful of the contamination of their country caused by the Chernobyl nuclear accidents, generally supported the move away from nuclear power. Why can't Japan, the country that suffered the worst nuclear accident, do the same? So what's the solution? So shall we forget the global warming and emitting CO2 irresponsibly? I suggest to increase renewable energy by utilizing abandoned farmland. It is true that CO2 emissions by nuclear power may be low compared to other methods of power generation. How can we reduce CO2 emissions and provide a stable supply of electricity without relying on nuclear power plants? There's a way to increase renewable energy by utilizing abandoned farmland. As of 2015, there were 420,000 hectares of abandoned farmlands. If we utilize half of them and installing solar powers and the wind power generators, we can generate 200 in total, 226 billion kilowatt. This is enough to cover 20% of the total electricity demand in Japan. The same amount of electricity that what the government is trying to achieve with nuclear power. So turning this idle, like abandoned land, farmland, into a source of renewable energy is a way forward for Japan, I think. So what do you think? Let me hear your opinion. Thank you.